Like the title of one of his biggest films, Rock Hudson was a giant in the film industry. His death from AIDS brought the world's attention to a killer disease. That's tonight's countdown to the millennium.
Tragically, Kevin Peter Hall contracted HIV following a blood transfusion and passed away of AIDS-related complications in 1991.
The artist who once dominated the stage, commanded the screen, and shaped an era, only to be cast aside when the world found out they had contracted HIV/AIDS. Over 700,000 people in the U.S. have died from the disease, but back in the 80s and 90s, it didn't just take lives. It erased names, destroyed reputations, and buried dreams. And for Black, gay men in entertainment, that erasure was even more brutal. One man made the whole world dance, his voice an anthem of freedom. But when he died, his body was hidden away, his funeral scrubbed of any mention of AIDS, like he had never existed. Another was one of Hollywood's most iconic leading men, the face of masculinity in America. But when the disease took hold, the same people who once idolized him turned their backs, leaving him to die alone. No hand to hold, no real goodbye. And the greatest tragedy? They weren't just fighting a virus. They were fighting stigma, rejection, and a world that wanted them erased. Today, we tell the stories of 25 Black gay male celebrities who lived boldly, created fearlessly, and left behind legacies that the world tried to forget. 1. Sylvester, the disco legend, erased by HIV stigma. When you think of disco, you picture flashing lights, shimmering outfits, and beats that make your body move. But if disco had a soul, it was Sylvester, the man with the electrifying falsetto, extravagant style, and an unapologetic spirit. By the late 1970s, Sylvester ruled the dance floors. His hit, You Make Me Feel, Mighty Real, wasn't just a club anthem. It was a declaration of freedom for Black people, for the LGBTQ+ community, for anyone who refused to be silenced. Unlike many of his peers, Sylvester never hid who he was. He stepped onto the stage like a queen, sang like an angel, and loved like there was no tomorrow. But as disco faded, a new darkness took its place: AIDS. Sylvester had no idea that the wild electric nights of the 70s had left him with something deadly. He contracted HIV in the early 80s, at a time when the disease was still a mystery, feared and demonized as the gay plague. As his body deteriorated, Sylvester tried to keep performing, but the world was not kind. AIDS didn't just attack the immune system, it stripped people of dignity, of careers, of everything they had built. By 1987, Sylvester was disappearing. The man who had once made thousands dance for hours could barely stand for minutes. His signature outfits no longer fit. His powerful voice was reduced to whispers. His body withered to less than 90 pounds, and those who once cheered his name vanished. The press ignored him. The industry forgot him. But even as he faced death, Sylvester refused to let AIDS silence him. He left all of his music royalties to the San Francisco AIDS Foundation, ensuring his fight would continue even after he was gone. He publicly acknowledged his condition, forcing the world to confront what it wanted to ignore. On December 16, 1988, Sylvester died, alone, far from the spotlight, without a standing ovation. His funeral made no mention of AIDS. His family saw it as a shameful secret. The media barely covered his passing, but Sylvester never truly disappeared. Every time You Make Me Feel Mighty Real plays, it's a reminder. He lived, he loved, he fought, and no one could dim his light. 2. Alvin Ailey, the dance icon who hid his truth until the end. How does a man build a legacy so great, yet die in complete silence? Alvin Ailey didn't just redefine dance, he transformed it into a powerful storytelling tool. As the founder of the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater, he took the struggles and triumphs of Black America and turned them into movement. His masterpiece, Revelations, wasn't just a performance. It was a spiritual experience, a hymn to resilience. But behind the elegance, the power, and the artistry was a man living in fear. As a gay black man in the dance world, Ailey knew that coming out could mean losing everything. In the 1960s and 70s, even in artistic circles, being openly gay meant being shut out of opportunities. So he kept his relationships secret, found love in the shadows, and avoided the risk of public scrutiny. He also lived in an era where safe sex was rarely discussed. The parties, the encounters, no one saw the danger coming. By the time Ailey realized he had contracted HIV, it was already too late. The early 80s were terrifying for LGBTQ+ people. AIDS was not just a death sentence, it was a stain. Ailey, a man who had spent his life pushing boundaries, suddenly found himself trapped in silence. He lost weight, his energy faded, but he refused to stop working. Those close to him saw his body deteriorating, but no one dared to ask. By 1988, he could no longer ignore it. He was hospitalized, but he lied about his illness, telling friends and colleagues he was suffering from internal bleeding. He feared that if the truth got out, his entire legacy would be tainted by the stigma of AIDS. Even as his body wasted away, he continued directing rehearsals, choreographing new works, pushing forward until he physically couldn't anymore. On December 1st, 1989, World AIDS Day, Alvin Ailey passed away. His death should have been a wake-up call, a moment for the world to acknowledge the devastation of AIDS. But his family, honoring his final wishes, erased any mention of the disease from his obituaries. He was buried with his secret. But his art still speaks. Every time an Alvin Ailey dancer moves across the stage, he lives on. No stigma, no silence, no disease can take that away. 3. Kevin Peter Hall, the Predator actor killed by a medical mistake. On screen, he was a monster, a giant, a force unlike any other. But behind the mask, Kevin Peter Hall was fighting a battle he never saw coming. Standing at 7 feet 2 inches, Hall was Hollywood's go-to creature performer, most famously playing the Predator in the sci-fi classic. Inside the heavy, suffocating costume, his movements brought the alien hunter to life. But behind the scenes, Hall was kind, soft-spoken, a man who loved his craft and his family. And then, one accident changed everything. In 1987, Hall was involved in a serious car crash. He needed surgery and received a blood transfusion, a routine procedure that, at the time, carried a hidden danger. HIV screening for blood donations was still new, and a contaminated batch silently sealed his fate. For years, Hall didn't know. He kept working, kept bringing movie monsters to life, unaware that something far deadlier was growing inside him. By 1990, while filming Predator 2, he began feeling weak. At first, he blamed the intense physical demands of his roles, but soon the truth became undeniable. By early 1991, Hall's body was failing him. He publicly revealed his diagnosis, hoping that by speaking out, he could help erase the stigma. But Hollywood wasn't ready. Roles stopped coming. Phone calls stopped. No one wanted an actor with AIDS. As his health declined, his wife, actress Elena Reed Hall, stood by him. But the world turned away. On April 10, 1991, Kevin Peter Hall died. Not from battle wounds, not from an on-screen fight, but from a silent enemy in his bloodstream, one that he never invited into his life. His death didn't make headlines. Hollywood let him fade into obscurity, just like it did with so many others. But for every fan who still watches Predator, for every child who sees his towering figure on screen, Kevin Peter Hall lives on, a giant, forever standing tall. 4. Ron Vawter, the actor who performed until his last breath. When death came knocking, Ron Vawter didn't hide. He stepped onto the stage, looked the audience in the eye, and kept performing. Vawter wasn't a Hollywood superstar, but in experimental theater, he was a legend, a fearless artist who blurred the line between reality and performance. As a core member of the Wooster Group, he pushed boundaries, playing controversial characters and challenging audiences. But nothing was as bold as his final role. In the early 1980s, Vawter contracted HIV, most likely through unprotected encounters within the close-knit theater community. He lived in a world where freedom and risk intertwined, where creativity flourished, but caution was rarely practiced. As AIDS swept through the LGBTQ+ community, he saw his friends disappear one by one. And then, it was his turn. By 1992, the disease was taking its toll. His body weakened, weight dropped, lesions appeared. But instead of hiding, he made AIDS part of his art. He took the stage for Roy Cohn, Jack Smith, a one-man show where he played Roy Cohn, a lawyer who had persecuted LGBTQ+ people and later died of AIDS himself. It was a cruel irony, a dying man playing a character who had condemned people like him. By the final act, his hands shook, the lesions on his skin visible under the stage lights, and the audience sat in stunned silence. Reality and fiction had merged. Even when he could barely stand, Vawter refused to stop performing. In 1993, he toured Europe, pushing his failing body to its limits, knowing this would be his final act. On April 7, 1994, Ron Vawter passed away. He never had a last curtain call because he never truly left the stage. His story, his art, his courage still live on. 5. Eazy-E, the gangsta rap pioneer taken by AIDS. Eric Wright, better known as Eazy-E, was the architect of gangsta rap, the man who brought NWA to life, the fearless voice behind Straight Outta Compton. He was street smart, business savvy, and untouchable, or so he thought. But HIV doesn't care how powerful you are. For years, Eazy lived fast. Money, cars, women, he never looked back. The rap industry was infamous for its wild, unprotected lifestyle, and Eazy was right in the middle of it. He didn't know that one night, one encounter, would change everything. By early 1995, the unstoppable force of West Coast hip-hop was struggling to breathe. What started as a simple cough turned into something much worse. When he finally checked into the hospital, doctors dropped a bombshell. It wasn't pneumonia. It was AIDS. The world was stunned. No one had suspected it. A gangsta rap legend with AIDS? The stigma surrounding the disease made it even more shocking. Critics whispered, fans speculated, and the rap community was forced to confront a reality it had ignored. Eazy had built his life on bravado, but in his final days, he was humbled. He used his last moments to urge others to learn from his mistakes. He made peace with his past, settled disputes, and left a message for the world. Don't follow my path. Learn from it. On March 26, 1995, at just 30 years old, Eazy-E passed away. No gunfire, no gang war, no rap beef, just a disease that didn't discriminate. His death shook the hip-hop world. And while gangsta rap moved on, Eazy's voice still echoes. Every time Boys in the Hood or Real Motherfucking G's plays, he's still there. A legend who went too soon, a warning that came too late. 6. Rock Hudson, the first Hollywood heartthrob to publicly battle AIDS. In the golden era of Hollywood, Rock Hudson was the very definition of masculinity. Tall, handsome, effortlessly charming, he was the ultimate leading man. Women adored him, studios banked on him, making him one of the biggest stars of the 50s and 60s. But behind that dazzling smile, he was living a life that wasn't his own. Hudson was a gay man in an industry that refused to accept him. Everything about his public image was a carefully crafted illusion. The romances with women, the red carpet appearances, all designed to conceal a truth Hollywood wouldn't forgive. He attended lavish parties, but his real love stories unfolded in secrecy. In an era where just one whisper could destroy a career, he had to play the biggest role of his life, one where there was no room for his true self. Then AIDS arrived. By the early 1980s, Hudson's body began to betray him. Rapid weight loss, chronic coughing. At first, he dismissed them as signs of aging. But when doctors confirmed the truth, it wasn't just a diagnosis, it was a death sentence. Hudson knew his time was short, but he made a decision that changed history. On July 25, 1985, he announced to the world that he had AIDS. The news shocked Hollywood. Before Hudson, AIDS was only spoken about in hushed whispers, dismissed as a gay disease. After Hudson, the world had to confront it. On October 2, 1985, Rock Hudson passed away. But his death didn't fade into obscurity. He became the first high-profile face of the AIDS crisis, forcing society to pay attention, forcing Hollywood to change. 7. Essex Hemphill, the poet who refused to be silenced. For Essex Hemphill, words were a weapon. His poetry was raw, unapologetic, urgent, the voice of black gay men erased from history. During the AIDS epidemic of the 1980s, white men were the faces of the crisis. But black men were dying too, and no one was telling their stories. Society ignored them, the healthcare system failed them, and history tried to erase them. Hemphill wouldn't let that happen. Through poetry, he spoke about desire, pain, rage, about the helplessness of watching an entire generation disappear. He wrote about love and sex, about the risks black gay men faced in a world that didn't care whether they lived or died. He forced the invisible to be seen. Then it came for him. By the early 90s, Hemphill felt the shift, the constant fatigue, the weight loss, the slow, creeping decline. He had written about it for years, but now it became his own story. And even as the disease took its toll, he kept writing, kept speaking, kept fighting. On November 4, 1995, at just 38 years old, Essex Hemphill passed away. But he wasn't erased. Every time his poetry is read, every time a black LGBTQ+ voice rises up, he is still there. Because Essex Hemphill wasn't just a poet, he was a revolution. 8. Howard Rollins, the screen star cast aside by Hollywood for having HIV. Howard Rollins was once Hollywood's rising hope, a black actor with undeniable talent, earning an Oscar nomination for Ragtime, 1981. People believed he would break barriers, redefine the industry, and become one of the greats. But his story took a tragic turn. His career, his reputation, and his life were swallowed by a disease the world refused to face. Being a gay black man in Hollywood meant living a double life. Rollins played strong, confident characters on screen. But in reality, he was constantly afraid of being exposed. He kept his relationships hidden, unaware that one of them had unknowingly given him a death sentence. By the late 1980s, his body weakened and his career slipped away. As AIDS devastated the world, Rollins turned to drugs and alcohol, an escape from the stigma, the whispers, the fear. When he was fired from In the Heat of the Night, many assumed it was because of his troubles with addiction. Few knew the truth. His declining health was the real reason. As the disease progressed, Hollywood forgot him. He vanished from the industry, from the spotlight, from the world that once praised him. In 1996, Howard Rollins died at just 46 years old. No grand tributes, no Hollywood memorials, just a fading memory of an actor who had once held so much promise but was discarded by the very industry he helped change. 9. Willie Smith, the streetwear icon who hid his battle with AIDS. Willie Smith wasn't just a designer, he was a cultural movement. Before the term streetwear existed, he was already making it a reality. In the 1980s, when high fashion was all about exclusivity, Smith turned the streets into the runway, making everyday clothing bold, stylish, and revolutionary. But behind the success, he walked a dangerous line between acceptance and rejection. As a black gay man in fashion, he had more freedom than those in other industries, but HIV/AIDS did not discriminate. The nightlife, the wild parties, the moments of reckless freedom, he didn't know he had already stepped into the epidemic's grip. By 1986, his health took a sharp decline. He was hospitalized for pneumonia, but it was only a symptom of something much worse. As the truth became clear, Smith made a decision. He would take his secret to the grave. He knew the industry would celebrate his designs while he was alive, but if they knew he had AIDS, they would erase him. On April 17, 1987, Willie Smith passed away at just 39 years old. His obituary made no mention of AIDS, no speeches honored his fight. He was a pioneer who had transformed fashion. But in the end, he was buried in silence, just as he had feared. 10. Reggie White, the devout NFL legend whose AIDS diagnosis shocked the nation. Reggie White was more than an athlete. He was a symbol of strength, faith, and discipline. Known as the Minister of Defense, he dominated the NFL, balancing his role as a fearsome defensive player with his work as a preacher. America respected him, admired him, held him up as a moral figure. But when news broke that White had AIDS, the world was left in shock. How could a devout Christian, a role model, a man of God, have contracted a disease that society only associated with sin and scandal? Rumors spread like wildfire. People assumed the worst. But the truth was far more complex. White did not contract HIV from a reckless lifestyle. It may have been from a surgery, a medical procedure, or a single unexpected exposure. But in the 1990s, AIDS was a death sentence for reputations, not just lives. Despite his declining health, White remained silent. He refused to let the world see him as a victim, refused to let HIV define his legacy. But by the time he could no longer fight, his once unstoppable body had wasted away. On December 26, 2004, Reggie White died at 43 years old. His passing shook the sports world, forcing people to face the reality that HIV/AIDS did not care about race, religion, or reputation. It was not just a gay disease or a consequence of immorality, it was a global crisis. His death was not just a tragedy, it was a wake-up call. Even the strongest, most respected figures were not immune, and it was time for the world to stop looking away. 11. Billy Wright, the forgotten rock and roll pioneer, lost to AIDS. Billy Wright was one of the most electrifying voices of the 1950s, a trailblazer who helped shape rock and roll before the genre even had a name. With his bold stage presence, flashy outfits, and perfectly slicked back hair, he was a blueprint for future icons like Little Richard. But in an era of deep-rooted prejudice, Wright wasn't just a singer. He was a black gay man unapologetically himself in a time when that was a dangerous thing to be. In the 1950s, while most queer artists stayed in the shadows, Wright lived his truth openly. He refused to hide who he was, even as the industry quietly kept him at arm's length. He had the talent, the charisma, and the voice, but society's intolerance held him back. As rock and roll took over the world, bold figures like Wright were left behind. By the 1980s, as the AIDS crisis devastated the LGBTQ+ community, stigma became just as deadly as the disease itself. Wright had lived freely, but that freedom came with a price. No one knows exactly when he contracted HIV, but as his health declined, he disappeared from the spotlight, battling his illness alone. On October 28, 1991, Billy Wright passed away at 59. No major tributes, no media coverage. A voice that helped lay the foundation for an entire genre was erased. Not because he lacked talent, but because he refused to conform. 12th. Max Robinson, the trailblazing news anchor, silenced by AIDS. Max Robinson shattered barriers as the first black journalist to anchor a national news broadcast in the U.S. In a media landscape dominated by white faces, he fought to prove that black journalists deserved a seat at the table. But behind his poised, authoritative presence on screen, he carried a secret, one the world wasn't ready to hear. Robinson wasn't just battling racism in the industry, he was also struggling with the immense pressure of being the first. He lived under a microscope, constantly scrutinized, expected to be flawless in a system built against him. That pressure led him to alcohol and discreet relationships, temporary escapes from the weight of his reality. No one knows exactly when he contracted HIV, but he never spoke publicly about it. As his health declined, he kept working until his body could no longer keep up. Even when hospitalized, he hid his illness, knowing that 3 letters, AIDS, could overshadow everything he had fought to build. On December 20th, 1988, Max Robinson died at 49. The news world barely acknowledged his passing, and the cause of his death remained a quiet, unspoken truth. He paved the way for future generations, but in the end, he still had to hide from the very society he helped change. 13. Jermaine Stewart, the pop star who hid his HIV until his last breath. Jermaine Stewart had the world singing along to "We Don't Have to Take Our Clothes Off," an anthem about love beyond physical desire. But behind the feel-good hit was a tragic irony. While fans celebrated his message, he was silently fighting a disease that was wiping out an entire generation of queer men. In the 1980s, an HIV diagnosis wasn't just a death sentence, it was a social exile. Stewart never publicly came out, but within the industry, his sexuality was no secret. Between the nightlife, the fast-moving relationships, and the unspoken risks of the era, he unknowingly stepped into a battle he couldn't win. As the disease took hold, Stewart withdrew from the spotlight. He knew that if the truth got out, his career would be over before the illness even took him. Friends noticed his weight loss, his exhaustion, the fading of his once powerful voice. But every time they asked, he just smiled, keeping up the illusion of the carefree pop star. Even in the hospital, Stewart refused to admit the truth. In his final days, he clung to his privacy, ensuring the world would remember him as he had always been. On March 17, 1997, Jermaine Stewart died at 39. No public statements, no grand farewell, just silence. He spent his life singing about freedom, yet in the end, he was trapped by the stigma of his time. 14. Kenny Greene, the golden voice of R&B and his final confession. A voice that could touch millions, but no one heard his cry for help. Kenny Greene was the lead singer of Intro, the 90s R&B group known for its soulful ballads like Come Inside and Ribbon in the Sky. His music was drenched in love and longing, but he himself could never love openly. As a bisexual man in the hyper-masculine world of R&B, Greene kept his personal life locked away. In an industry where black men were expected to be tough, dominant, and straight, being anything else could end a career overnight. He moved through relationships in secrecy, unaware that one of them had sealed his fate. By the late 90s, his health began to fail. The once effortless high notes became harder to reach, and every performance took a toll. Fevers, exhaustion, the relentless cough. He knew what was happening before a doctor ever said the words. When it became clear he had little time left, Greene did something he had spent his life avoiding. He told the truth. He admitted he was HIV positive. He admitted he was bisexual. But by the time he found the courage to live authentically, it was too late to change the outcome. Just months after his final confession, on October 9, 2001, Kenny Greene died at 32. He spent his life singing about love, but in the end, the world never loved him back the way he deserved. 15. Brad Davis, the Hollywood star who chose death over AIDS. How does a Golden Globe-winning actor disappear in silence? Brad Davis captivated audiences with his gripping performance in Midnight Express, 1978, earning him international acclaim and a seat among Hollywood's elite. But even at his peak, he knew the industry had no room for weakness, especially not for someone with AIDS. Davis, a straight man, never imagined he would become one of the faces of a disease so deeply stigmatized. Years of surgeries and IV drug use led to an accidental infection, a cruel fate in an era when an HIV diagnosis meant total isolation. As the disease progressed, he watched his once striking face become gaunt, his body wither, his strength fade. The physical pain was unbearable, but Hollywood's silence was even worse. Friends stopped calling, roles stopped coming. The industry he had given everything to acted as if he never existed. Rather than endure the slow, agonizing decline, Davis made a choice. He took his own life with assisted medication. On September 8, 1991, he died in his wife's arms. Not as a fading star, but as a man who refused to let the disease define him. Hollywood turned its back on him, but his performances remain. and though his name may not be spoken often, his story is one of defiance, a refusal to be erased. 16. Craig Garrison, the fearless theater actor who took HIV to the stage. Craig Garrison was one of the few theater artists brave enough to be openly gay and HIV positive in an era when that kind of honesty could end a career. He wasn't a Hollywood star, but in the world of experimental theater, he was a fire that refused to go out. Garrison never let his diagnosis silence him. Instead, he brought his illness to the stage, weaving it into his performances, making it a part of his art. As lesions appeared on his skin, as his voice grew weaker, he still stood under the lights, showing the world that he was alive, even as his body betrayed him. In his final days, he was frail, barely able to move, but he refused to lie down and wait for the end. Even when he could no longer stand, he wheeled himself to the theater, determined to perform one last time. Only when he was completely drained did he allow his friends to help him back to his bed. In his final days, he was frail, barely able to move, but he refused to lie down and wait for the end. Even when he could no longer stand, he wheeled himself to the theater, determined to perform one last time. Only when he was completely drained did he allow his friends to help him back to his bed. On December 14, 1992, Craig Garrison passed away. But he didn't die in a hospital bed. He died on the stage, in the hearts of those who watched him fight until the very last curtain call. On December 14, 1992, Craig Garrison passed away. But he didn't die in a hospital bed. He died on the stage, in the hearts of those who watched him fight until the very last curtain call. 17. Michael Jeter, the Green Mile, star who faced HIV with a smile. Who would have thought that a man who brought so much joy to others would die from such a tragic disease? Michael Jeter was beloved for his roles in The Green Mile, Sesame Street, and countless other films and shows. With his warm smile and boundless energy, he made the world believe his life was just as lighthearted as the characters he played. But reality was much darker. Michael Jeter was beloved for his roles in The Green Mile, Sesame Street, and countless other films and shows. With his warm smile and boundless energy, he made the world believe his life was just as lighthearted as the characters he played. But reality was much darker. When Jeter was diagnosed with HIV, he didn't hide, didn't run. Instead, he used his life to raise awareness. But even courage couldn't stop the disease from ravaging his body. His weight plummeted, his face became gaunt, but through it all, he kept smiling. A tired smile, perhaps, but one that never faded. Even in his last days, he kept working, pushing through the exhaustion to finish his scenes. When he grew too weak, he leaned against the wall, rested for a moment, and then carried on, determined to act for as long as he could. On March 30, 2003, Michael Jeter passed away. But he didn't go out in fear. He went out with dignity. He smiled, he lived, and he fought until his final breath. 18. Fela Kuti, the Afrobeat king who refused to believe in HIV. Fela Kuti wasn't just a musician, he was the voice of a people. Using Afrobeat to challenge oppression and injustice, he fought with music, but even he couldn't defeat an enemy he refused to acknowledge. Living a life without limits, Fela had hundreds of lovers and embraced his wild lifestyle. However, when HIV/AIDS spread across Africa in the 1990s, the very life he celebrated became his downfall. As his health deteriorated, he refused treatment and dismissed HIV as a Western conspiracy. Though his body weakened, his spirit remained unbroken. On August 2, 1997, Fela Kuti passed away at 58. His music and legacy endure, a legend whose fight will never be forgotten. 19. Merritt Butrick, the Star Trek actor, taken too soon. Merritt Butrick was a bright young star in Star Trek, but death stole his future before he could reach his full potential. As HIV/AIDS ravaged Hollywood, Butrick became one of its tragic victims. While he never publicly discussed his sexuality, secret relationships and late-night parties led him down a path he never expected. In his final days, his body became a shell of what it once was, and he didn't want his friends to see him in that state. On March 17, 1989, Merritt Butrick passed away at just 29. Though his life was cut short by a disease rarely spoken of for Star Trek fans, he will forever live on as David Marcus, the son of a legend. 20. Arthur Ashe, the tennis legend who contracted HIV through a blood transfusion. Arthur Ashe wasn't just a tennis champion, he was a warrior. The first black man to win Wimbledon, the US Open, and the Australian Open, he fought both on and off the court, taking on racism and injustice. But his toughest battle was against a disease he never saw coming. In 1983, Ashe underwent heart surgery and received an HIV-contaminated blood transfusion. It was a silent death sentence, not from reckless choices, but medical oversight. At first, he kept his diagnosis private, knowing the world wasn't ready. But when he could no longer hide it, he used his voice to spread awareness. Even in his final days, Ashe remained strong, leaving behind wisdom and resilience for his daughter. On February 6, 1993, he passed away at 49. He may have lost his final match, but he won a far greater fight, one for dignity and legacy. 21. Joe Higgs, the father of reggae, who died in poverty and obscurity. Joe Higgs helped shape reggae, mentoring legends like Bob Marley and Peter Tosh. But while they became icons, he remained in the shadows, forgotten by the industry he helped build. Living the free-spirited life of a reggae musician, Higgs unknowingly became vulnerable to the virus that ravaged his generation. By the late 80s, his health declined, but stigma in Jamaica forced him into exile in the U.S. Broke and unable to afford treatment, he died on December 18, 1999, at 59, alone, uncelebrated. Yet, his legacy lives on in the heartbeat of reggae music. 22. Roy Cohn, the LGBTQ+ oppressor, destroyed by the very disease he vilified. Roy Cohn built his career persecuting gay men, orchestrating the infamous McCarthy-era witch hunts. But behind closed doors, he lived the very life he condemned. Reckless encounters in Washington's secretive circles caught up to him. In 1984, doctors confirmed his AIDS diagnosis, but he denied it, claiming liver cancer. Even as his body withered, he clung to power and status. By 1986, disbarred and abandoned, he died alone at 59. No tributes, no mourning, just the cold irony of a man consumed by his own hypocrisy. 23rd. Assotto Saint, the poet who turned words into a weapon against death. Assotto Saint, a Haitian-born poet, refused to be erased. In the 80s, when HIV was a death sentence, he boldly declared himself gay and HIV positive, using his art as resistance. He didn't know exactly when he contracted the virus, but as friends died around him, he knew his time was coming. Yet, he never stopped writing. His poetry wasn't just self-expression, it was survival. On June 29, 1994, at just 36, he passed away. But his words endure, echoing the resilience of a generation that refused to go quietly. 24. Jean Anthony Ray, the famed dancer whose flame burned out too soon. Jean Anthony Ray embodied energy and rebellion in Fame, 1980. But behind the scenes, his life spiraled into excess. Caught in Hollywood's fast lane of drugs, parties, and unprotected encounters, he contracted HIV. By the 90s, as his health declined, the industry turned its back. Once the electrifying dancer who commanded the screen, Ray could barely stand in his final days. On November 14, 2003, he died at 41, leaving behind an empty stage and an unfinished dance. 25th. Ailey Zane, the choreographer who changed dance but couldn't escape his fate. Ailey Zane redefined contemporary dance, pushing boundaries of race, sexuality, and movement. But the HIV/AIDS crisis stole countless artists, and he knew he was next. Diagnosed in 1986, he kept creating, refusing to let the disease silence him. Too weak to dance, he directed from a chair, ensuring his vision lived on. On March 30th, 1988, he died at 39. He knew his time was coming, yet he never stopped writing. His poetry wasn't just self-expression, it was survival. On June 29, 1994, at just 36, he passed away. But his words endure, echoing the resilience of a generation that refused to go quietly. 24. Gene Anthony Ray, the famed dancer whose flame burned out too soon. Gene Anthony Ray embodied energy and rebellion in Fame, 1980. But behind the scenes, his life spiraled into excess. Caught in Hollywood's fast lane of drugs, parties, and unprotected encounters, he contracted HIV. By the 90s, as his health declined, the industry turned its back. Once the electrifying dancer who commanded the screen, Ray could barely stand in his final days. On November 14, 2003, he died at 41, leaving behind an empty stage and an unfinished dance. 25th. Ailey Zane, the choreographer who changed dance but couldn't escape his fate. Ailey Zane redefined contemporary dance, pushing boundaries of race, sexuality, and movement. But the HIV/AIDS crisis stole countless artists, and he knew he was next. Diagnosed in 1986, he kept creating, refusing to let the disease silence him. Too weak to dance, he directed from a chair, ensuring his vision lived on. On March 30th, 1988, he died at 39. But his legacy didn't end. His movements still ripple through dancers today. These artists once lit up the world, shaping music, film, dance, and culture. But when the AIDS epidemic struck, the world turned its back on them, forcing them to leave the stage in silence. HIV/AIDS didn't just take their lives, it stole their dreams, their dignity, and the legacies they should have been celebrated for. But today, we refuse to let them be forgotten. They were more than names in history books. They were people who fought, who loved, who gave everything until their last breath. If these stories moved you, share this video so that future generations remember not just the tragedy of AIDS, but the brilliance of those who lived through it. Their stories deserve to be told. Their names deserve to be remembered forever.